With just how easy the PlayStation was to develop for when compared to the other consoles of its time, it soon became a great system for many homebrew games thanks to the net euros that would have otherwise have been illegal to sell on the commercial market without a license. In the case of Magic Castle, it was developed in '98, and after finding a company to distribute the game, it unfortunately fell through and stayed on the shelf for nearly 20 years, but is now fully playable after one of the original developers decided to complete the project. It's essentially an action RPG that allows you to choose from one of several classes. You've got the wizard that can utilize magic against enemies and fly using her staff, or the knight which can block incoming attacks with their shield, the archer who can shoot arrows in front of them and dash through the air, and finally the fighter who can grab and throw enemies, making each playthrough feel entirely different from the next. Now the main premise of the game is to make it through a castle that's made up of several floors, with all of the rooms being procedurally generated that change each and every time you play. By locating a key hidden within each floor, it's possible to progress to the next one, and ultimately face and defeat an evil lord that serves as the game's boss. With it being an RPG, stats and progression play a major role, and with each enemy you defeat you'll receive a small amount of XP, but just as important are coins that can be found throughout each level that can be used to buy items and armor that grant you different effects, from increased amounts of damage to being able to jump higher or automatically get healed. There's a lot of options that can make the otherwise daunting task of reaching the top of the castle all the more easier. Even though it doesn't reach the same height set by other roguelikes of the same time such as Azure Dreams, it's still quite enjoyable to play through. Scop is based on the now infamous YouTube series Pet Scop that focused on a fictional PlayStation game with a somewhat cryptic and haunting story. The homebrew project successfully recreates nearly every aspect of the on-screen game and allows the player to take on the role of the Guardian as they explore a series of interconnected locations with a huge focus on puzzle solving, collecting and environmental storytelling. As the game begins, you enter what is known as Even Care, which serves as a sort of tutorial where you've got to capture different pets by solving simple puzzles. But after you've managed to catch them all, this is where the game flips the table and gives you access to the new Maker Plane, a complete reverse of Even Care with its seemingly endless foggy fields, where the horror aspect of the game slowly begins to creep in. From here you've got to explore and slowly find your way to many different areas that begin to unravel the story. But a big part of the game is collecting what are known as pieces, and as you acquire 100 of them in the different locations, you'll unlock further interactions that push the events forward, with many of its clues hiding within plain sight, so examining as much as you can is a good idea, but actually watching the original series on YouTube will greatly enhance your playthrough of the game, as without prior knowledge of Pet Scop, the game has a tendency to feel quite aimless, and it's not meant to be a standalone experience, but a sort of companion piece to the original series. What really drew me to the game though is just how impressive it is to see it up and running on the PlayStation hardware, with the use of dynamic lighting, procedural generation, semi-transparent objects, and a range of high poly models. It really is a technical feat considering the limitations of the console, so for those that are invested in the Pet Scop mystery, you owe it to yourself to try this one out, as it ends up feeling like a really faithful adaptation of the mysterious game. Celeste is one of the most celebrated platformers in recent memory, and following its huge explosion in popularity, it wasn't long until the homebrew community started to work on a version of its own. Released in 2015 and then ported to the PlayStation hardware, the game was developed in just 4 days and delivered on capturing the essence of the original, but at the same time embracing a new retro aesthetic that took on a sort of 8-bit style that would feel right at home on the PlayStation. If you're at all familiar with Celeste, then you'll know exactly what to expect, with the game being made up of nearly 30 different screens or stages that each present a self-contained challenge to overcome. As the main character, Madeline, you've got a pretty limited moveset, with you only being able to jump, activate your signature dash which allows you to change direction mid-air, and finally the ability to slide down walls, but with each fail you're sent straight back to the start of the level. So timing is key, as well as the precision of your jumps, as all it takes is a split-second mistake to find yourself having to start again. This completely mirrors Celeste's fair but brutal design, with each of the stages being filled with plenty of hazards such as spikes to avoid, moving platforms to use to your advantage, as well as a few collectibles like strawberries and keys to add a little bit more of a challenge. Making it even harder is the complete lack of checkpoints or assist options like modern Celeste, making it a far more frustrating experience, but all the more satisfying should you succeed. Even though the game isn't exactly long, with it being able to be completed in about an hour or so, it is highly replayable, and trying to complete it as fast as you can ends up being just as enjoyable as the original game it's based on. Terra Incognito is an action RPG that was initially distributed through demo discs and bundled with the official PlayStation magazine, but would end up never seeing an official release. Drawing inspiration from the likes of Zelda, it blended hack and slash combat with platforming and light puzzles that saw you taking on the role of an adventurer as you reach a mysterious island and are tasked with locating a golden pedestal and to return it to your ship within a strict 1 hour time limit. What makes it quite impressive when compared to the other games developed with NetYazo is that it all takes place within a fully 3D environment where you're free to explore one of its many locations, such as temples, forests and caves, all linked together by tunnels of light which allow you to travel from one area to the next. To be fair, it's pretty rough around the edges, but there's quite a bit to do, one being the option to take on enemies from bats to skeletons and weird little blobs, and although the combat is extremely basic, it's more than functional and allows you to hack at your opponent, with each swing of your sword coming along with a nice weight, but the complete lack of combos or special moves really holds it back. The simple puzzles more than make up for this shortcoming though, with you having to push boxes or rearrange them to make certain jumps, activate switches or trigger a series of bombs to unlock a path forward, really helping mix up the otherwise simple and often slow gameplay. There's also a few collectibles throughout the island as well for those looking to see it all, but with the lack of a save system or checkpoints, each run must be completed in one sitting, and with 2 different endings depending on whether you return with the pedestal or not, there's not that much in terms of replayability. Ultimately, Terra Incognita is nothing more than a glorified tech demo, but it possessed a solid foundation for a game that had the potential to truly impress. It's just a shame that we'll never be able to see the completed vision. Even though there's a popular mod for Minecraft that tries to recreate the game with the original PlayStation in mind, it doesn't run on actual hardware, but thanks to the dedicated effort of the community, there's actually a version of the game known as Fromage that takes the fundamentals of Minecraft and actually works on the PlayStation despite all of its limitations. Of course, when you compare it to the real Minecraft, there's a lot of features missing, but the basic mechanics of the game are in place, allowing you to carve out caves, build structures, or explore the blocky landscape that features all different types of terrain that any Minecraft fan will be familiar with. But there's no survival mode, no crafting or enemies to fight, making it feel much more like a proof of concept rather than a full-on port, and the controls are pretty awkward when compared to modern standards, but it's totally expected given the limitations of the hardware and overall homebrew nature of the game. But regardless of all of its drawbacks, it manages to capture the creative freedom of early Minecraft, letting you carve out your own adventure even if the scope of the game is a lot smaller. The most impressive aspect of the project is the fact that it's even up and running in the first place, as the PlayStation was never designed for such complex engines, yet it manages to deliver, albeit with some drawbacks, and as you would imagine, the visuals take a noticeable hit, with the draw distance and frame rate not being exactly ideal. The audio is another area where the game falls short, and depending on what hardware you're using, you may run into a few issues at times, leaving the game completely silent, but it's more than playable and has quickly found high praise throughout the homebrew community. So if you're at all a fan of Minecraft and are looking to get into the world of PlayStation homebrews, then this is a great place to start. Blitter Boy is yet another game that was distributed on the ever popular demo discs of the official PlayStation magazine that delivered a top-down shooter with a strange premise that sees you filling the role of Blitter Boy as you try to save babies scattered across 20 different levels from a group of monsters. What makes this one a bit of a standout is that it actually went on to receive a few rewards, but would never see the light of day with a full retail release and would go on to largely be forgotten by the mainstream. The gameplay loop is simple. As you're dropped off at each level, you've got to quickly carefully navigate the arena and avoid as many monsters as you can as you try to guide the babies into a portal in the middle of the stage. Of course, what makes it all the more enjoyable is how you've got a few different ways to protect yourself as well as the babies you manage to help. First and foremost, you've got your trusty blaster that makes short work of the monsters, but as the levels progress their presence begins to increase, and this is where one of the many different power-ups comes into play, from shields to increased amounts of health, as well as different weapons such as fruit bombs, rainbow shots, and the ever handy satellites that spin around you and take out anything that walks into them. In the later stages it becomes absolute mayhem. Helping out in these moments is the dash mechanic that slowly chips away at your health but ends up being one of the more reliable ways to get out of harm's way. But this in itself adds to the strategy and forces you to conserve your health and weigh up the risks of using power-ups too early. It all soon becomes quite addictive and balances the frantic action with having to escort the babies perfectly, and with each of the levels being quite short, it's one of those games that you'll likely find yourself going back to try and earn the highest scores you can time and time again. Ultimately, it ends up being a perfect snapshot of the early days of indie games, which more than deserved its chance to be fully released. Thankfully, all of these years later, it's now easier than ever to experience it for yourself. Roller was a homebrew puzzle platformer that's got a lot in common with the likes of Super Monkey Ball and Marble Madness that saw you having to guide a ball through a range of creative levels. There's about 15 of them in total, with each of them being a self-contained puzzle that managed to blend platforming and problem solving together, as well as test your reflexes, with them all revolving around momentum and gravity as you carefully try to guide the ball to the finish. The movement of each stage is tied to the D-pad or analog stick, where the face buttons allow you to jump or activate switches, with each stage coming along with new conditions to amp up the difficulty, such as moving platforms or limited amounts of time in which to complete the run. But it does feel pretty lackluster in terms of keeping track of your highest scores, with no leaderboard system or any way to track your overall progress. That being said, in terms of raw gameplay, it's quite a lot of fun, but it's far less ambitious when compared to other homebrew efforts on the PlayStation. Visually, it's your typical PS1 fare with low resolution textures and a small array of colours, but a nice little touch has to be the various animations of the ball, giving the game a little bit of a personality as he cheekily winks or smiles at the screen after a good run. But as I've mentioned, it's the game's lack of scope that really holds it back. With only 15 levels and no extra modes, there is a severe lack of depth. But for those quick pick up and play moments, it's a pretty decent time, but with more content it could have been something really special. From the moment you boot up Hover Racing, it's clear to see where the developers got their inspiration, and that's with Nintendo's F-Zero. Created by a small team and led by Tomokazu Sato, a rather mysterious man who doesn't have any other project to his name, the game was developed using the Net Yaros that provided an easier way for creators to envision their projects, but it would sadly never see a full release. As I mentioned, it does seem a lot like F-Zero on the surface, but there are a few differences that make it something special. The first is the amount of content that's included, with just over 9 tracks to race on, as well as a few different modes such as Time Attack and Grand Prix, 4 vehicles and an extra 2 to earn and unlock. But where the game differs from the Super Nintendo Classic is when it comes to control, as well as being able to simply steer left and right, as well as having access to a boost to propel you forward. Each ship also has 2 boosters on each of its sides, giving you a few more options for tackling one of the many tight corners on each track. To make matters even more complicated, some of the ships don't even have a rudder on their back and solely rely on these boosters to turn, making the learning curve quite steep. But it's really worth sticking with, as once you've got it down, it feels incredibly satisfying to take corners at high speeds and surge across each track. Each of the ship's boosters are mapped to the shoulder buttons, so you'll have to use 4 fingers to make use of them all. And this is where it can get really tricky, as trying to manage your velocity and direction takes a lot of patience and skill, especially for the ships that you can't automatically steer with left and right. With its smooth 60 FPS gameplay and simple but effective sci-fi aesthetic, Hover Racing had all of the right ingredients to be an absolute gem of a racing game that sadly never got its chance to shine. Robot Run is a shoot-'em-up that drew a lot of inspiration from many of the twin-stick arcade shooters of old and delivered a vibrant but hectic experience for the PlayStation homebrew scene. The objective is simple, and you've got to survive wave after wave of enemies, from small drones to larger threats that take far more hits to take down, and the real challenge is being able to weave in and out of their unpredictable paths that see you having to dart across the screen, all the while returning fire. As with many shooters, there's a few power-ups to help you out along the way, with the likes of invincibility for short periods of time, or rapid shots that give you much more of a fighting chance. Now there's about 15 to 20 levels to make your way through, with the difficulty of each slowly scaling up with faster enemies and denser waves, making the simple act of dodging them all the more of a challenge. And when compared to other games developed for the Netyazo, Robot Run does feel less ambitious, but its minimalist approach to its visuals help the game pop on the screen, with nice vibrant colours which allow you to focus on the simple but difficult gameplay it presents. Although not quite as hectic or challenging as Robotron, the game that clearly inspired it, Robot Run is a solid shooter, and for anyone delving into the extensive amount of games available through Homebrew on the PlayStation, it's definitely worth playing. Just don't go into it expecting the same amount of depth that you would find in some retail releases of the same kind. Its short campaign, lack of other modes, and also being quite difficult to get up and running are all issues that hold it back a bit. With that being said though, if you're a fan of old school arcade shooters, then Robot Run is a great example of the genre, and like many other games on this list, never had its chance to flourish in the wild. Well, that's another video in the books. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos, and you can also follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date with what's going on with the channel, as well as join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Ophian Mind, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, then you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.